One day the pain won't go away. It was my junior year of high school when my friend Brian, who was a year older than me, disappeared for the summer and came back his senior year in shape. Now, Brian, like me, grew up as a sort of chunky child in the Midwest. Yeah, and being chunky in high school specifically gets you treated sort of like Jack Black, or if you're funny, or sort of like a serial killer if you're not. High school is just mean, it's not fun. I was bullied relentlessly for my acne and my big old belly. It was a blast. But Brian came back in shape. And, I was very curious. I asked him, how did you do it? What did you do? And he said, come with me after school and I'll show you. So we piled into his car and he took me and a few of our other friends out to his house. Brian lived just outside of town in a trailer park, surrounded by cornfields out by the country roads. We grew up in a small town of only a few thousand people. The kind of small town that when I tell people I'm from a small town, they say, oh, like such and such? And I'm like, no, like this town that literally has a few thousand people and you've never heard of it. But Brian took us out to his house in the trailer park and he said, we're gonna run now. I can't say I wasn't an active kid. I played sports, I went hiking, all this stuff, but I had never really ran before. Running was something skinny people did. But Brian, he pointed us in a direction and he said, you're gonna start running. And so we did. And we ran along the country roads and out to a graveyard just a half mile away. Circled around and went back. Along the way, he was very deliberately getting behind us and pushing us and telling us to not stop, to keep going, even if it hurts, whatever, just to push through and keep going. And it did hurt. This was my first time, any of our first times running, and Brian had been doing it for an entire summer. So it was a struggle, but eventually we did it. It might have taken longer than anybody wanted it to take, but we did it. After we got done, Brian told us that that was all he did. He did that, some sit-ups, some push-ups, some squats, and that's all it took for him to entirely change. When we asked him why, my thought was, oh, it was because he wanted to lose weight, because I think every chubby kid in high school wants to lose weight. Kind of hard to love your body in a space like that. But he surprised all of us by saying that he was going to join the military. He was going to be a Marine.
Recall window will remain stable for 20 minutes.
Now, if you're from a small town, you probably understand the immense pressure put upon young boys and the smarter girls to join the military. There are military recruiters in the cafeteria. They come and they give talks, and they offer you, this poor child with no prospects of college or anything else, a chance to make a little money in exchange for your body. Brian was the first person I knew personally who was joining the military. My father had been a Marine, and the stories that he told made it sound like the most miserable experience of his life. My father was the kind of person who joined, did his 2 years, and got out. And he never really got anything from it besides getting to see some of the world. This didn't mean much to us at the time, except that Brian would be leaving after he graduated. So for the rest of that year, we all ran with him. We would go to his house every day after school. We would jog the mile, maybe do some push-ups and sit-ups, and then, hang out as usual. Play a little Nirvana, try to learn some songs on the bass guitar. Same old, same old. The end of the year came and Brian graduated, and he did in fact leave. I remember at that point, when he went to boot camp, that I had already been running for almost a year, and my life, my body at least, had completely changed. I had lost nearly 40 pounds. I had gained I don't know how many pounds in muscle. So when he came back from boot camp, I was excited to show him the progress I made, only to find out that he had gone through an even more dramatic change. My father used to say that if you went to the Marine Corps fat, which is to say not even like fat like I was fat, but just slightly overweight, you would get put through an entirely different boot camp. This other boot camp was designed to, quote, get you caught up. And according to my father, it was torture. That summer after my junior year, I ran every day. I would get up early, I would play a little video games, and then I would go to the nearest trail and run. Sometimes I would run a mile, sometimes 3, sometimes 6. Sometimes I wouldn't run at all. But I had a routine. I had a routine of exercising in the morning, pretty dramatically, to the point of like exhaustion. Coming home and then sort of, living my life. I was, up till that point, a fanfiction teenager. I sat on my computer all day. I played video games, but I mostly wrote fanfiction and talked online to people. I was kind of a shut-in, kind of a loser, and running sort of gave me confidence for the first time in my life. This confidence was, if you've experienced losing weight, you probably understand better than anybody else can, or better than my words can explain. When you lose weight, people just look at you differently. They treat you differently. And even as a teenager, it's considered a good thing. That being fat is bad and evil. So all of the compliments I would get from people, all of the niceties, and just the fact that I could run, that I could go further and farther and faster than ever before, was life-changing. Going into my senior year, I remember this one experience where I wore one of my father's old shirts, and my father was always a skinny man as a kid, but I wore one of his shirts to school. It was a very nice shirt, a button-up shirt. And for the first time in my entire, teenage life, this really pretty girl complimented me. I remember I had got up to do something. I don't remember, at the front of the class. She said something like, "You look really good," or "that shirt looks really good on you." And I, in my infinite wisdom, in my infinite charisma, was able to turn around and hit her with the Han Solo, I know. Highlight of my life right there. Not really, no. High school was miserable, okay? Don't let this fool you. But even through senior year, I would run a lot. I remember I was finally able to run the President Fitness Test Mile. I think I did it in 10 minutes at the beginning of the year, which is quite slow, I think, in retrospect. But by the end of the year, I had dropped my time all the way to 7.5 minutes, which is pretty good. I think that's the best mile I've ever run. I started incorporating a lot more exercise in this sort of routine. I would do push-ups every morning. I did 30 push-ups every morning, 30 sit-ups, and 30 squats. During school, during gym period, we had the choice of either participating in whatever the weekly sport was, or going to the gym. And so I went to the gym, and I started lifting. Towards the end of the year, I was able to do, those clapping push-ups where you push off the ground and clap and then go back down. I was very impressed with myself. But it was also during this time that Brian's influence sort of reached its apex, and I decided that I too would join the military. I went to a recruiter, I began the process, they told me everything, blah 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 blah. What it boiled down to is that while my fitness and everything was in the right spot as far as strength and speed, I was still overweight, according to them, and so I began to change my eating habits. This was probably the toughest part of the journey. I don't think mentally it was tough, at least not at the time. The sort of restriction of you will be going to boot camp in X amount of months, I think was all the motivation I needed to change how I ate. But it did change my relationship with my family. This was the first time that my weight loss had negatively affected relationships. My family, I was sort of raised on a fast food diet. And having to tell my parents every weekend, no, I do not want Burger King for breakfast. No, I can't have McDonald's anymore. It started to annoy them. I can't really explain why, because I'm not them. I don't know if they were jealous at me or if they were upset because I was, sort of going against how things always went. But basically, I would have a bowl of Honey Nut Cheerios in the morning. I would have whatever was at school for lunch. And then for dinner, I would just have like 2 turkey sandwiches or something. Really simple, consistent. And at that point, the weight started to really come off. I think, I started high school. I don't know. I started my like junior year, the heaviest I'd ever been at like 280. And by towards the end of my senior year, I was down to like, I think 210 was the lowest I got. Which for me, I was rather tall. I was rather strong. 210 was quite slim for me. And it was in large part due to just sort of this routine that I had of running every day, exercising every day. Even after a run, like in the evening when the sun went down, I would go for a walk where I would start at my house and go to the edge of town, which was about 2 miles away, 2 miles back. So a 4-mile walk, pretty good. I would say if you if you wanted my advice if you wanted to try to lose some weight or get in shape, that's a good place to start. And maybe even just start with a mile out, mile back. Just start slow. You don't need to go crazy. I was a high schooler. We're getting there. I don't want to gloss over too much, but I did not end up joining the military for lots of different reasons. Maybe best left for another video where I can, talk about that specifically. What's important is that after high school, I continued to run sort of off and on. Sometimes, taking a break for a week, sometimes taking a break for months. Life happens. You get a new job that's more physically demanding. You get a job that's less physically demanding and you sort of fall out of shape a bit. But things wax and wane based on responsibility and stuff like that. But every time I stopped and came back to running, it was tough. Obviously, it would be tough at first. My muscles were kind of like, what are you doing? But after like a week or two, I would get back into the same groove that I used to be in. Like the pathways through the muscles and the pathways through my brain were still there to some degree. I just had to uncover them. But this all changed. One day, I remember I lived downtown in the big city that I live in, going to college, finally getting my, finishing my degree. And I went for a run and my knee hurt. And, I had had lots of different pains on and off throughout all of this time. I had, blisters on my feet that I would sort of, run through the pain and they would eventually get better. I had, shin splints and Charlie horses and, ankle injuries. All of these things that had like debilitated me for some amount of time, but had eventually gotten better. So when my knee hurt, I sort of finished my run, went back home, and said, I'll try again tomorrow. And so I did. The next day, I went back out again, started my run, and after a while, the knee hurt again, in the same spot, the same sort of pain. And I said, okay, maybe I'll just take it easy today. But this continued the next day and the day after that, till eventually I went and saw a doctor, and they told me that I needed to stay off of it for, X amount of time. And when that time was up, I tried to get back into it, a bit more slower than before. And while it held up for a little bit, after about a week of trying, the knee started hurting again. And this was sort of a moment when I think I realized I was getting older. I was only 24 at this point, which to some of you might seem really old and to others might seem really young. But I was 24 and I was coming into contact for the first time in my life with the fragility of my body, that maybe the pain doesn't ever go away. Unlike these other injuries that I had that I ran through and they had gotten better, this one didn't get better at all. Eventually, other things in my life started to take priority. I was going to college for art. That's what I wanted to do. And I remember my teacher sort of sat me down and said, you need to make a decision. Is this writing thing going to be your career, or are you just going to sort of do it and have like a normal job? And I remember that conversation. It was a really good conversation. It was the moment I decided that I was just going to get an office job if I could and work on my writing on the side. And just, maybe one day the writing could be my job. But even if it didn't, I would keep doing it. More than running ever was, writing was my passion. And so I got that office job after some searching. Things were a little different back then. And I started focusing more on writing. The sort of exercise, the running, fell to the side, mostly because of the knee. That's when I started to get into biking. I would bike a lot, and that seemed to be better. It didn't make my knee hurt, and for the longest time, my knee would only act up if I did a lot of sort of like physical activity, squatting activity. Like, for instance, the day after I would move apartments would be pretty rough. But the knee itself didn't just hurt all the time. More recently, I have been biking, and sometimes afterwards the knee hurts. And it's one of those things, again, coming face to face with your sort of mortality, with the fragility of the body, where you realize that maybe the pain never goes away. You know, living with an injury, a disability, is a lifelong process. You know, I think as a kid, you thought you get hurt, you rest for a bit, and you get better. And even as a young adult, I'm sure people who haven't been seriously injured, or people who aren't disabled, you probably feel that way about your body. That if you ever got hurt, when you eventually pull a muscle in your back, you know, whatever it is, that you will just rest, and in X amount of time, you will be back to your old self. And I think part of growing up is realizing that that's not always the case. Sometimes the pain doesn't go away. Living with pain is a process, one that I probably don't do the best I could. I still ride my bike, I still exercise. I'm not nearly as in shape as I used to be. You know, I'm 34, but I try. And the injury definitely makes it harder. It definitely puts a limiter on what I could do. When I was younger, I felt like a steam engine that you could just keep shoveling coal into and it would keep outputting energy. Not necessarily unstoppable, but unlimited. And now I feel a lot more like a low battery car. I can go so far away from my charging point before I need to double back and make sure to get plugged in before I run out of charge. I don't have some sort of moral to the story, and I'm not even saying all of this to like try to scare the young people into taking care of their bodies, but just to express, you know, sometimes the pain doesn't go away. And learning that can be very difficult.